In the year 1935, in Akron, Ohio, two men got together to discuss an issue that they both shared in common. These men, whose names you might recognize, were Bill Wilson and Dr. Bob Smith. The issue that they shared in common was their tendency to abuse alcohol, their inability to stop drinking. In short, alcoholism. The organization that they founded is Alcoholics Anonymous, a fellowship whose purpose is to help its members stay sober and help others achieve sobriety. Today, chapters of Alcoholics Anonymous can be found in every major city and most minor ones. And while there are skeptics of the program, as well as some studies that dispute its efficacy, there are other studies that affirm its efficacy, not to mention countless people, including some treasured friends of mine, who insist that they would never have been able to quit drinking and or remain sober without it. That said, there are areas where Alcoholics Anonymous needs to do better and needs to be held accountable to do better. And unfortunately, those areas are not discussed as much as they need to be. Can I cover all those areas in one video? No. But I can give it a start, and that is what I intend to do in just a moment. Hello, Internet. This is Sophia, the Red Angel, doing my best on this channel to bring you quality material. If you like it, then subscribe to this channel, ring the bell, share, and comment. Anyway, as I said before the intro, while Alcoholics Anonymous has plenty of skeptics, and there are studies that cast doubt on its efficacy, there are also studies that affirm its efficacy, as well as many people who swear by it, who will assure you that it was essential to their achievement of sobriety and is essential to them staying sober. But that said, there are certain areas where Alcoholics Anonymous needs to do better and needs to be held accountable to do better. There are people whom Alcoholics Anonymous has failed, who deserve better than to be glibly dismissed as constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves. People, including myself, whom Alcoholics Anonymous failed to help, people for whom, in some cases, Alcoholics Anonymous even made the situation worse. These are often people for whom Alcoholics Anonymous should have been able to do better, whether that be within the rooms of AA or by means of redirecting these people to other resources more suited for them than AA is. And there are systemic problems within Alcoholics Anonymous that contribute to these failures. To make matters worse, these systemic problems are not discussed as much as they need to be. When they are discussed, it is often in remote corners of the internet, such as the orange papers, that one has to go out of their way to find, and which do not seem all that interested in separating the strong, valid criticism of AA from the criticism that is dubious at best. It is actually, of course, very understandable why some critics of Alcoholics Anonymous operate in such a manner. While even AA's own grapevine publication will occasionally discuss the fellowship's failure to come through for people who are not just constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves, even in outside settings, such discussion tends to fall short of even touching on AA's systemic problems. Such criticism of Alcoholics Anonymous that does address the systemic problems is often so taboo that people will not engage in it unless they have been hurt badly by the fellowship. From this place of pain, these people find the idea that AA is at all redeemable to be an abhorrent notion. Such people are no longer merely interested in getting AA to reform itself. They are to the point of wanting to take Alcoholics Anonymous down. Not only are they repulsed by the idea that AA might be redeemable, but they are similarly repulsed by the idea that there is anything good to say about the fellowship. And I totally understand where this mindset comes from. To be honest, until a friend helped me pull myself out of it, I was myself trapped in that mindset. However, I am glad that I got that help pulling myself out of that mindset, because while that mindset is indeed understandable, what it is not is constructive. There are horror stories from the rooms of AA, and by that I mean horror stories that make mine look like a cakewalk. They need to be discussed, and not in a way that dismisses them as isolated cases of someone just not following the program all the way, but rather in a way that seriously addresses AA's systemic problems. But there are also many success stories, and it is wrong to so hastily dismiss them as cases of someone not really being helped, or as cases of someone giving AA more credit than it deserved for their recovery. At least it is wrong to dismiss these stories in such a manner without strong scientific grounds for such dismissiveness. A scientific basis which, after the reading up I've done, I am convinced that we do not have. Of course, some people, even if forced to acknowledge AA's ability to help some people, might still want to take it down in order to make way for a better program to emerge and take its place. However, if that were to happen, how could we assure that what came to replace AA did not have the same systemic problems, or even worse ones? Better to try, if we can, to push AA to fix its systemic problems rather than burn it down and hope that something better will grow in its place. A bit about myself. I am a transgender woman. I grew up and spent my young adulthood in East Tennessee, an environment that is extremely toxic to people in the GRSM, also known as LGBTQI community. And it is especially toxic to transgender people. I spent my first 3 decades of life trying to pretend to be a guy and doing a pretty bad job at it. The effort put an extreme strain on my psyche, and the fact that I was not entirely successful made me the subject of intense ridicule and social repercussions. Then, when I finally realized in my early 30s that I could keep the charade up no longer and started my transition process, society was not accepting of this. It was an environment where even leaving my home is asking for trouble. I was shoved to the complete margins of society, having to exist in the shadows. The social circle that I had hung out with prior to transition, that all evaporated in a heartbeat. I had to seek out a new social circle from scratch, and that did not go well. In such a conservative environment, there are a lot of people who will flat out refuse to associate with a trans person in a gender-affirming way at all. And while it is true that there are still many people who will interact with a trans person in a gender-affirming way, that is not the only obstacle to carving out a social circle if you are trans. With the exception of a few places, I had to arrange my life in such a manner as to avoid having to use public restrooms. That severely limited what places I could hang out at for any length of time. And if I were to meet and start hanging out with a group of people at one of the few places that I could hang out at safely, the moment that the social bonds got to the point that I would be invited to go with them to other places, there was no way to be sure that those places would be as accommodating. Often, they were not. The upshot? Whenever I had started to build up a new social circle, before long, the rug would somehow get pulled out from under me. And yes, I know well that there were lots of transgender people in that area who had it worse than me. But that does not change the fact that even what I went through was downright toxic. And eventually it got me to the point that to cope with this, I started drinking. And over time, the drinking problem got worse. Long story short, eventually there was an intervention, and I ended up in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. The first challenge was finding a place to go to attend meetings. This at first did not seem like a problem. There was this facility where a few meetings a day were held, just a few minutes' drive from my house. Of course, this facility did not take long to show that it had no interest at all in providing a place that was really safe for transgender women. So quickly it became clear that my choices were a slightly safer facility at the other end of town, or drive nearly an hour to the next town for a place that would provide what could pass as an acceptable level of safety. Of course, even there it was made abundantly clear that I was not free to discuss in meetings the way that the trans-hostile environment of East Tennessee contributed to my drinking problem. To mention that, I would have to travel even further to a church where once a week a specifically LGBTQI chapter of Alcoholics Anonymous would meet. Alcoholics Anonymous, of course, did not cause certain facilities to be unsafe places. That was caused by the transphobic environment of East Tennessee. However, Alcoholics Anonymous did place on me the demand to attend meetings, and in doing so, made the difficulty in accessing a safe meeting facility into more of an issue than it would have otherwise been. This was a cruel double whammy, given that the reason why I needed the help of AA was a problem that I had as a result of living in such a hostile environment to begin with. The next challenge was finding a sponsor. After all, in Alcoholics Anonymous, you got to have a sponsor to guide you through those steps. A lot of people simply did not feel comfortable sponsoring the likes of me. So I had to ask around a lot in order to find a sponsor each time that I was looking for one. And that was a grand total of 3 or 4 times, because each time I was dropped by one sponsor who would explain that she had too much on her plate to continue sponsoring me, I had to go and look for another one. Again, AA did not create the environment that made it so hard to find a sponsor, but it did place on me the demand to find a sponsor, which made my difficulty finding a sponsor to be more of an issue. But wait, it gets worse. The sponsor that I had for the longest amount of time while I was in Alcoholics Anonymous, while she was operating from the best of intentions, she did some very harmful things. She insisted that all the discriminations that I faced for my being transgender were my fault for being so open about being trans. I tried to explain to her that I knew from my experience that going stealth, as it is called in the transgender community, when you try to live as the gender that you identify as without other people knowing that you are trans, that lifestyle does not deliver on the dream of normalcy. That rather, it is a lifestyle of constantly looking over your shoulder, wondering when someone will spot you, but she would not listen. And out of her completely uninformed views about stealth, she insisted that I do certain things that have negative consequences that have still not been recovered from till this day. Also, in general, she was unwilling to listen to feedback from my experience, convinced that everything that she needed to know about the lived reality of a transgender woman, she could know by simply making parallels between her cisgender experiences and my trans experiences. Unwilling to hear it. If I dared suggest that at times her own experiences might not be as analogous to mine as she thought they were. This is not because of her being a bad person or anything. It is because the very culture of AA treats any such feedback that a sponsee might give as being highly suspect of being the alcoholism talking. Of course, there no doubt is definitely good reason to be concerned about this. But the problem is that this concern is taken to such an extreme that the result is a tacit dismissal of the possibility that at times such feedback might actually be valid, and furthermore, at times it could even be crucial. This wasn't even limited to just issues that were specifically transgender issues. It at times happened with other issues as well. For example, when the sponsor insisted that I get down on my knees and say very specifically the Lord's Prayer, despite my protestations that I was not okay doing that, given that I am not a Christian. Of course, at the time, I was not an atheist either, but I was a Hellenist, not a Christian. And this and other impositions of Christianity that were made on me resulted in a very unhealthy in and out dynamic that lasted for a while between myself and the Christian church. Granted, such things are not supposed to happen in AA, at least not in theory. However, the inordinate amount of authority that sponsors are given over their sponsees, an authority that in my case was exacerbated even further by the difficulty I had finding a sponsor, along with a culture that actively discourages sponsors from listening to such protestations from their sponsees, all that makes such occurrences all but inevitable. I could go on, but as I've said, that is way too much for one video. This will only be the first of probably several videos in which I attempt to redress the systemic problems in Alcoholics Anonymous. Again, I do not discount the many people whom Alcoholics Anonymous has helped to achieve and retain their sobriety. However, the horror stories deserve proper treatment as well, and mine is not even close to being the worst among them. There are people who lost their lives, not to alcoholism itself, but to abuses suffered in the rooms, abuses which the structure of AA may not have directly caused, but nonetheless enabled. Anywho, from a personal standpoint, this has been the most emotionally difficult episode for me to make since the time that I started this YouTube channel. But I nonetheless hope that you can appreciate the importance of making sure that this story is told. Please hit the thumbs up button and leave your comment in the comments area below. Make sure that you are subscribed to this channel and that the bell icon is active so as to increase the chance that you receive notifications when I upload new videos to this channel in the future. Share this video with your friends and everyone else, whether by social media or by whatever other means. And until next time, see ya!